And welcome to the afternoon sessions for our second and final regional day of our conference. And next on the agenda, it will be our regional coordination and collaboration, which is led by Mr. Burkhanov, Christopher Sampson, and Ian Thompson. So may I now invite our speakers to take the floor. There's no specific order, but also may I ask our colleagues to bring everybody from our organizing team, just to ask everybody down at the lunch that we're about to start now. Well, I'll hand over the floor. Let's give a warm welcome to our panelists for this afternoon. Thank you.
Talo Falava, welcome back. I can see our ranks have dwindled, but in the interest of time, we will proceed. We have a few more sessions to run through this afternoon. So we're, in a way, resuming the plenary today after a full day yesterday, and also some really exciting and interesting showcase presentations that we had this morning. My name is Bakhodir Burkhanov. I'm based in Fiji as country director of UNDP, covering 10 Pacific Island countries, and I also have a regional designation covering 15 Pacific Island countries through our regional program that is housed in Suva in Fiji. I'm from Uzbekistan, so as a piece of trivia to you, this is one of the world's two double landlocked countries. So you can imagine the regional cooperation is not just important, it's a matter of survival for a country where I come from. And this is incidentally also the topic of today's discussion, regional coordination and collaboration. So we've heard some really good, interesting stories today. So the learning and networking value of this event has been absolutely tremendous. We took a closer look at some of the digital transformation pathways from different parts of the world, from Australia, the UK, Estonia, Caribbean, New Zealand, and a lot of really interesting homegrown solutions and ideas from the Pacific. So over and above the learning value, could we try to raise the bar and look at how we can make difference with these ideas and solutions regionally? Lots of ideas and technology out there, but we need to really invest a little bit more thinking and resources to grow them and also to adapt them to the unique context of the Pacific. I think an important question we need to be asking is what's missing in the current equation. And I would like to introduce our panelists. But before I do that, maybe a quick piece of information which is sort of rich in numbers. We have in this Pacific Island region 11 small island states, several overseas territories, 8 crop agencies, and 22 regional groupings or sub-regional groupings. So I think there's a lot of diversity in our fairly small region. And I think we will begin to look at this complexity and how to make sense of it. I'm very happy to introduce our two panelists, and they're very knowledgeable in their respective fields. First up, Mr. Ian Thompson, who's a senior e-learning fellow at the University of South Pacific. He is also involved in the Crop ICT Working Group, chaired by the University of South Pacific, which aims at promoting and facilitating the use of information technology in the Pacific. He has had a decade of experience working inside this region, starting at SPC as its inaugural ICT outreach coordinator. And he will present to us some of the thinking that's happening at the level of the Crop ICT Working Group and its action plan moving forward. Our second panelist is Christopher Sampson, who's a director of Digital Society Foundation. He's a very experienced CIO and former Deputy Secretary for Technology and Innovation with the government of Tasmania. He has recently been focusing on helping develop disadvantaged communities through non-profit startup and registered charity called Digital Society Foundation, which is being established to focus on digital inclusion challenges. Chris has connections throughout the Pacific, much like Ian, through his work with the Association of Pacific Island Legislatures and regional participation in PIF programs, where he champions Pacific digital empowerment through the initiative called Connect the Blue Continent, and he will talk to us about that. I'd like to ask our panelists to be brief and crisp. This is possibly the shortest session of the event. We have 40 minutes overall, and your presentations will hopefully be within 10 minutes, and then we'll open up the floor, and maybe we'll hear a little bit from our country delegates, and we might actually poke some of them to give us their feedback. So thank you very much. Over to Ian.
Thank you, Chair, and I just reiterate on behalf of USP, we really do appreciate being invited here, especially by the government and also by UNDP. So thanks again for the opportunity. I feel, yesterday I spoke at the last session and everybody seemed to have gone home by then, and now I'm speaking at the first session straight after lunch, and I don't know, is it me? So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things that we've been doing in the region about getting greater utilisation of ICT in the region. And many of you here, I think, know me, and we've been working together for some time. So I'm just trying to encapsulate that in a fairly short presentation. So in 2015, I think my colleague Kissione mentioned this yesterday, the Pacific leaders confirmed that ICT was one of the 5 most important things that they could work on for development in the region. And they looked at what had been happening there, and the general conclusion was that we had made good progress in a range of areas, connecting submarine cables, restructuring the industry, doing all those sorts of things, but they weren't seeing the economic development that they expected to see, and they weren't seeing the social development that they expected to see out of this investment of the infrastructure. So they came to USP and said, you're the lead crop agency on ICT here, get busy and see what you can do about this. So we put forward a proposal to develop an ICT working group and to try and bring all of the partners together in the region. So it includes the donors, it includes the main United Nations people, it includes NGOs, it includes regional organisations, it includes the industry. So we all got together and talked about what it is that we should be doing here. We were guided by a document that was produced a couple of years ago called the Pacific Island Regional ICT Strategic Action Plan. And a couple of years before, USP had looked at the actions that we needed to do and produced a document that had something like 50 different actions in there. So we thought that's too many, so we prioritised them. And then we made some of them high priority actions, and there were 17 of those anyway. So we decided it was too hard to do 17 high priority actions. So we thought, how can we make some progress here? So in the Crop ICT Working Group, we formed a number of task forces. The reason for doing this was that in the last 10 years, there's been a lot of focus on developing infrastructure and restructuring the industry, about bringing the prices down, about getting connectivity better, improving the bandwidth and everything else like that. So we've been doing some really good things there. But what we see now is there seems to be a need for a shift of mindset away from developing the infrastructure and then actually using the infrastructure. So we're trying to promote this We're trying to promote this mindset shift from infrastructure development to using the infrastructure appropriately. And that means that the industry itself, the ICT sector, needs to change the way that it's thinking and working. We still need to keep on doing the good development work, and there are good signs that that's going to continue doing. That work hasn't been completed. We still don't connect everybody. We're still having some problems with prices and everything, but there's good signs that we're making good progress there. So we need to shift the focus now away from the infrastructure and more into the digital technology and the digital transformation type work that we're talking about. So we formed a number of special task forces. So there's a list of them there: education, cybersecurity, e-government, rural connectivity, disaster management, universal access, green ICT. And each task force seconded regional experts into the task force to look at what we could do in the way of regional initiatives that would help many countries in their adoption of ICT to help solve some of their problems. Each task force was charged to recommend 2 or 3 initiatives that would make this difference. It would help many countries to move forward. So they have to be regional, they can't be in a country, and they have to help many countries. So the idea was, after we did that, we would then call a meeting of all of the countries, all of the donors, all of the stakeholders, all of the partners together to say, guys, here's a range of initiatives that the experts in the region have said we could do that would help everybody. Tell us which one's the most important. So the idea is to prioritise the top 2 or 3 of these initiatives, and then we'll say, okay, we'll do that. Tell us what the top ones are, and we'll get it going. So that's the plan that we're working on. We want to rapidly implement these initiatives at a regional level that will help many countries. So where are we at? Well, we've formed many of those task forces, and they're doing some good work, and we're beginning to get some feedback about things. We're seeing some common themes coming out. So connectivity, rural connectivity will be an obvious common theme. So that's an issue for health, it's an issue for education, it's an issue for disaster management. So that seems to be a common theme. And there are a number of other themes like that that are emerging that we will talk about at this meeting and try to address those things. We're planning to have a regional meeting that I talked about in sometime late July, early August, where we will put this on the table and say, not to the ICT people, but to the economic people, the planners of the countries, the ones that are already struggling trying to solve problems, to say, which one of these things would help you most with what you're struggling with right now? So we're not looking at new initiatives, we don't want to have new priorities, we don't have new things that we're doing. We want to focus on what are you having trouble with right now, and how can ICT help you there, and how can we help you in that process. So that meeting's coming up, and we'll be letting people know about those sorts of things shortly, and we'll be sending out invitations to countries and donors and other stakeholders. I think that's probably enough for now. I wanted to just leave on one thing that we've identified as an issue in the ICT working group, but we haven't started working on it yet. And it's this issue there, the last one on the list, that talks about what is the capacity and what digital transformation skills do we have to support the leader's vision of digital transformation and digital technologies and things. My intuitive response is the leaders have the vision, but I'm not sure that we have the capacity in the region to A, help make that happen, and B, sustain that. I think that's a very interesting question. I'd like to leave you with that question, and if you've got any thoughts about that issue, I'd be keen to discuss them. And I wanted to differentiate between digital transformation skills and infrastructure development skills. So I'm pretty sure that we're fairly well off for infrastructure development. So Fred and Peter and all of the telcos and everything else like that, we've got some really good skills there. We're doing a really good job. We don't really need to focus on that area. It's the other area about how do we, if you like, re-engineer the process. How do we digitally transform the process? They're the skills that we're looking for. And I'd really be interested if any of you have any thoughts or input about that. How can we do that? And I think Chris might take up that issue now. And I hope he has a great solution for us. Thank you.
Honourable ministers, leaders, community members of this great nation of Samoa, my fellow international development colleagues and friends, and of course my fellow techies. Ladies and gentlemen, talofa and good afternoon. My name is Chris Sampson. It's an honour to be presenting to you today, and my thanks, as per Ian, to UNDP and the government of Samoa for inviting me to the table. By way of introduction, I like to open with this beautiful NASA image of our region, our blue continent, the blue Pacific. I believe it's World Oceans Day today as well. My connection with this region started, as mentioned by the chair, when I worked as a technology and innovation head in an island community here, the island state of Tasmania, which is this one here. It's cold down there. Next stop, Antarctica. Of course, it's not really a Pacific island, but the waters are mixed. Luckily, there was not many clouds that day. During my time in Tasmania, I met with many governments across the world and in Asia and the Americas, looking to build trade, commercialization of technologies for the economic development of Tasmania. And while in Hawaii, one of the senators there, Senator Kalani English, asked me to take an interest in the digital divide issues in the Pacific Islands, particularly in the north, and connected me with the Association of Pacific Island Legislators, the parliaments basically of the region. So nowadays, I'm an independent advisor and systems designer with Future Earth Systems, and I've been meeting regularly with many parliamentarians, business and community leaders, members of civil society over the last several years, building my awareness of the situation here in the Pacific and looking at pathways for the sustainable and prosperous future for Pacific communities in the digital age. Together, we have created an advocacy initiative called Connect the Blue Continent and a non-profit startup called Digital Society Foundation to specialize in this digital divide and digital inclusion work. So on behalf of my friends and colleagues at the association and civil society across the Pacific, I humbly offer these thoughts as input to your deliberations on your way forward into the digital age. I've begun to think about this as a kind of Pacific digital adaptation challenge, placing it alongside the great challenge of climate change and climate adaptation. Digital change, like climate change, is happening whether we like it or not. And just like climate adaptation, it is an imperative to adapt to survive. So I think of this challenge in 3 layers as a kind of stack, a simple framework to help make sense of the different parts of the puzzle. At the base is digital infrastructure. Our challenge here is to ensure no one is left behind. So universal availability, reliability, and affordability is the go. It's not just an engineering challenge, all the cables and wireless towers and satellites and base stations, but actually it's as much about the business models and the regulatory regimes. So we have to get these right and have a way of planning, monitoring and evaluating that ensures we're including all communities, making sure it's affordable in the local economic context and not leaving anybody behind. At the second layer, I think of skills, so-called digital literacy, the skills we need to use digital technology effectively, both as users and as designers and digital engineers. So of course I think about education at all ages, the great work Ian is doing at USP and at the university, local university here in Samoa, but also for our younger children at primary and secondary schools. and of course adult education. And I also think about the need for a vibrant digital technologies industry across the Pacific, because we need a whole ecosystem of skills in order for the region to harness the value of technology, both for using it and for creating the locally contextualized products and services needed for the economy and for the government and the community. And then at the top tier, I think of systems. Systems, made of people, processes, and information. We want to ensure that we use technology effectively to gather the information, automate the processes where applicable, and ensure people are able to operate in the most valuable roles in the system, connecting and helping each other, the front line, if you like. And in the creative parts of innovation and product and service creation, building effective systems for trade and government and community, keeping alive traditional crafts, being with our families and friends. The systems are how we really harness the value of digital technologies right across our socio-economic breadth, our health systems, our economic systems, our justice systems, managing government and public services, our tourism industry, our fisheries, our banking systems, and so on. It's a kind of matrix. Some folks call it system of systems. And in every part of that matrix, we need to locally contextualize, design, and adapt those systems on the ground from how they work now to how you want them to work in the future. My philosophy with systems is that they are really part of your culture. They are like your systems. They are your systems. They need to work for your citizens and your businesses in the way that you want them to work, in accordance with your customs and cultures, in balance with your environment. So this is the empowerment point for your communities. Last night at the dinner, we saw how you have incorporated new materials into your traditional food preparation and cultural clothing. This is just the same. Digital is just new materials, new tools for you to use to adapt your systems. In terms of organizing your systems, I must say I really like the concepts of the front office and the back office that Paul raised in his opening session. And I think that's a really good way of thinking about it. And I also really love the Estonian approach to the back office, the crossroad or X-road, and the digital ID architecture from Estonia. Thank you, Hannes. I see so many possibilities to adapt these for Samoa and for the region in a way that works to accelerate digital government and build economic development through collaboration with your local digital experts, your digital entrepreneurs, your younger generations, your brilliant students coming through the education system and in the universities. I'm also taken with Helen's approach in New Zealand, organising systems around life events like birth, deaths and marriages of citizens, but also, of course, businesses also have births, deaths and marriages. So this is a great way to think of the matrix of systems, the front office connection points with people and the back office architecture to avoid the Hannes' spaghetti of bureaucratic inefficiency that holds us back. Now, the key, of course, is that these layers are symbiotic. We need all of them, and we need action on all of these fronts, and Ian's been talking about that, of course. The objective is to enable, the endpoints, the better economy, the better health and well-being, the sustainable future. And when we think about everything that we really want for the future, it's summarised quite well, of course, by the SDGs. And this is the key about digital. It's really about everything. It's about all the different parts of our socio-economic system, all our industries, all parts of our government. It's about how we're navigating into the future. So I think of it like that. And I've also been informed by the aspirational vision for the region set out in the Framework for Pacific Regionalism by the Pacific Island Forum of Leaders and other leadership groups across the region. And I've been a little bit active behind the scenes in lobbying for leaders to prioritise ICT, digital transformation and innovation, including sending submissions to the regional consultation programme run by PIFs, attending civil society forums, lobbying Asian Development Bank and the Australian government. So my latest submission paper sets out this Pacific Digital Adaptation Challenge and the regional and national mechanisms that I think are needed to move forward effectively. So to finish this short talk, I will summarise these mechanisms at a high level, but you're welcome to download the paper from the PIF's website, or I can make it available directly to you. The mechanisms are informed by lots of great input from very detailed analysis carried out by folks in the World Bank, this excellent paper, Digital Dividends, I can really recommend that. And also, of course, many others from places like ITU, the CROP ICT Working Group, the framework papers that Ian was talking about, the PRIS app, and all the actions going on around the region. And actually there are lots of papers, lots of great input. The challenge is to make sense of all this and work out what to do on the ground in a practical manner, what are the gaps, and how might we activate the ecosystem and get the value of this technology in an empowering and culturally intact way for your economy, for your communities, and for your people. You know, there is such a thing as planning paralysis or analysis paralysis, we sometimes call it. Things can seem so complex that you can get stuck in a circular process of talking and planning. So this is about cutting through to the practical mechanisms needed. Okay, so I'll finish off with this. At the base layer, I think Ian made the point that we're achieving a lot with connectivity, but there's more that needs to be done. So the mechanism I'm proposing here is a monitoring and evaluation mechanism that actually looks particularly at the state of rural, remote and neighbour or outer island communities to say, where are we up to with connectivity here? Is it affordable? Is it reliable? What more needs to be done? I think that's actually a data platform that we should build in the Pacific with your own expertise and entrepreneurs, and make that data available to the international community to help drive the master planning and drive the additional network investments and resilience that's needed. Because remember that you're competing with the other regions around the world, and they are moving ahead a lot faster with their denser economies. So that sort of live way of understanding the reality of the state of your connectivity, I think is a must-have. So that's the first thing. Next, I think the thing about skills is, we've got some great education stuff going on. I know that there's plans in primary and secondary. We need more adult digital literacy programs on the education side, but I'm particularly thinking about the need to build and support the industry, because we need your own people to get jobs when they come out of university with digital skills. We need them to be able to have jobs in your own economy. That's absolutely vital. That's the key to. So an industry development program to me is an absolutely key part of how we need to proceed. And then on the systems front, frankly, we need a funding mechanism, because really without funding, all of this is just talk, to be frank. And I think that that funding mechanism needs to be akin to climate adaptation funding. It's something that I think leaders need to take up on the global stage. There is so much to do, and I'll be frank with you, the digital divide, I would say, is growing. It's growing at the moment because other parts of the world are moving much more quickly. So I think we must address this need for a funding mechanism, and that mechanism needs to bridge the gap between sort of international funding, giant infrastructure projects, and the on-ground, local, your own businesses being invested in, being supported to build products and services and harness technologies, build partnerships and so on. I also think that we need to make sure there's government policy, so local government policy to invest in local entrepreneurs, build the innovation hubs. I believe that Samoa is looking at this right now, and create the investment in that local ecosystem. And that requires funding, both national funding, but I think that really requires international funding. And the final 3 points for this top layer systems is, first it's this idea of adaptation dialogues. And the idea here is that in each part of your system, whether it's managing your fisheries or managing tourism or managing some part of your government, that needs to be an open discussion that includes industry, includes civil society, includes government. And those dialogues helped you to understand sort of where you are now, where you're trying to get to, and how you can figure out to track progress along the way. I know that the work that Peter and Tina are doing in dialogues is that, I think that sort of thing is going to help, and I would promote this idea of dialogues and looking at the matrix and figuring out how you're going to have those discussions in each part. Second is adaptation collaboration system. The idea is that you actually use digital technology itself to help you drive your systems development journey. So this is about a storytelling, a knowledge sharing platform that the region can build and own itself, so you can share stories, inspire each other, understand how to trade with each other in terms of digital assets and so on. And then finally, there's the idea of a series of seed projects. So you start with on-ground actual projects that include your own local teams and start to incorporate some of the technologies like blockchain and so on that we've been hearing about today, but in particular invest in the local capacity and partnership building parts of your own ecosystem. And contextualizing for Samoa itself really takes the type of leadership that you've shown by organizing this conference. And I want to particularly thank the Prime Minister, your Prime Minister, and your Minister for Communication for the engagement and for standing up. And please, humbly, I really hope they can take the messages of this conference back to their peers and leaders across the Pacific, because we need to build that political will to raise the stakes and get the international funding that's needed for the region. So that's the summary of the Digital Adaptation Challenge and Connect the Blue Continent, and Fa'afete Tele Lava. I hope I said that right.
Thank Chris for this presentation, and I'd like to borrow your ecosystem approach or the cycle approach to sort of move to the next part of our discussion, which is really a bit more interaction and feedback from the floor about how these ideas resonate. We have country representatives here. I think it would be really good to hear from your ideas, your examples about whether indeed we have capacities that are needed to implement the vision. We understand there is a vision. Leaders have been prioritizing ICT and digital transformation as one of the objectives for regional cooperation, which stems from country-owned initiatives. But yet, the progress remains very slow, and I think progress is needed across all three elements of the ecosystem that Chris talked about. Across infrastructure, we're not out of the woods on infrastructure. Samoa has now submarine cable capabilities. A number of other countries in the Pacific Island region still do not have it. So I think their infrastructure remains a big challenge. With it comes challenge of accessibility and affordability of connectivity. So there are some really big issues on the infrastructure front. On the skills side of the equation, some really interesting ideas that Ian talked about and the task forces that were created under the regional mechanism, really looking at it more from the application angle, which is, looking at ICT and education, cybersecurity, e-governance, disaster management, which is a very important issue for our part of the world, access, and green ICT. So a number of ideas in terms of to move this. And then finally, the glue that holds everything together is the systems and the thinking and the leadership and the political will. So I'd like to open the floor for contributions from, perhaps we'll prioritize country delegates in the first instance. We're really keen to hear from you. You've been with us for now a day and a half. Some of your reflections on what's happening at country level, how can it be more than the sum of individual parts, and what can we bring forward to the regional level would be really, really welcome at this point. The floor is open. I see Tuvalu and delegation exchanging glances. May I perhaps ask our Honorable Secretary of Finance from Tuvalu, he's formerly Secretary of Education, to share some perspectives from Tuvaluan angle, which is a small island, remote country with its own connectivity and communications challenges. Or Honorable Deputy Prime Minister, if you want to take the floor.
Thank you, moderator. I think first of all, let me, on behalf of the Deputy Prime Minister of Tuvalu and Minister of Finance and Economic Development, express our deep gratitude to the government of Samoa and UNDP for getting us here. We are from the Ministry of Finance. From the first day, I was still wondering why we were invited to be part of the discussion, the presentation. It was mentioned that at the end of the day it is a funding. And I think this is one of the reasons why the Minister of Communications and Transport of Tuvalu wanted his colleague to be here at this conference. Hear me? Right, now just getting to closer to the point of this panel session, I think as you have rightly mentioned, Tuvalu is still struggling with the issue of infrastructure. It was mentioned yesterday that perhaps in the next 10 years Tuvalu will be connected. We would like to think that it will be much faster than the 10 years. But just getting to perhaps to Ian's question of what would be the priorities from member countries where regional collaboration could assist. And I would like to approach that question by getting back to Graham's comments during his wrap-up comment yesterday, the two ways to shop. You know, there's one way, the shopkeeper will ask you, what can I get you? And the other is, I've got this. So it's really, I think for me, it's also important to focus on what's possible out there. You know, for a small country like Tuvalu, with a lot of issues on the table for the government to consider, I think it will also help the government to decide and prioritize if we have the information on what's possible. You might find that your first priority will be very costly, whereas the next two could be done with very little effort, but put together their impact could be just as equal as your highest priority. So I think the what's possible question is very much important. But just by way of perhaps reflecting on what Tuvalu might be wishing to consider, I think it is very timely for the government of Tuvalu at this point in time to really explore the options of, you know, we don't really want to wait until the cable lands in Funafuti, then ask the question, what can we do with the capacity? You know, the classic example that was highlighted yesterday on the unused capacity by our dear friends in Tonga really highlights that point. You know, you referred to my experience with the Ministry of Education. One of the initiatives we have done there, and it's still under progress, is e-learning. And our friend Ian was also giving us a hand in that respect. But it's really small scale, and getting our Outer Island primary schools set up with simply a computer lab. But that computer lab could be compatible to something greater when internet is connected. And one of the issues we're facing at the moment is due to many issues that I won't go into. Junior high school is currently being pushed to primary schools. We have only one secondary school, and because for unique reasons, we want our junior classes to be part of primary schools, but we simply don't have the resources to equip every single primary schools with the right subject-specific teachers and also resources. So perhaps this e-learning program can be further extended, you know, to link schools via video conferencing or something like that. And we believe it will greatly impact on the educational outcomes that we have in our strategy, the Kake Ngatolu. So something like that, you know, the health that has been talked about, telemedicine, these are potential areas we are looking at, given that the sparse spread of our islands in Tuvalu, although there are only 8 of them. It's not as much as compared to other islands, but you know, they are the big issues that the government struggles with every day. And I also like the presentation earlier today by Samoa's University on Aptus. In fact, this is kind of what we're doing with our e-learning activity, uploading the local area, the servers with open educational resources like CANs, academies, and also other OER service providers. So I'm not really sure. Again, it's the question of what's possible out there in terms of regionalism, because the only reason why we would consider regionalism in these country-specific issues is because there might be areas for efficiencies, cost reductions, and so forth. So, but we will be appreciate if we will be advised by our experts on what are the possible areas there to collaborate on. And I think I will end there.
Thank you very much, Secretary, for these reflections. And I apologize for putting you on the spot, but I knew you had some good contributions to make. And thank you really for explaining some of the issues that we're dealing with from a perspective of countries such as Tuvalu. I'd like to borrow again the analogy about adapting to technology and digital transformation. And these countries are dealing with multiple levels of adaptation. So they're adapting to climate change, and the digital technology, which is probably less threatening but equally formidable challenge, is something that we need to deal with. And resource crunch is really a big issue for countries such as Tuvalu, which is a least developed country and has many other important priorities to address. But I think what you've given us by way of your feedback in terms of actually both from your social sector background in education and your current capacity more in the fiscal control system, I think it tells us that you have some ideas moving forward in education and health. And I think connectivity would greatly improve implementation of these challenges. May I ask now our panelists to respond?
No more minutes left.
Some small technical issues there. I'd just like to commend what Tuvalu are doing, because the outer islands are not really reliably connected to the internet. And doing offline solutions, as you've done, is a very good way to approach this. And I think too often we think it's all about connectivity. We've got to get broadband, we've got to get the cost down. But there are other solutions, there are other technical solutions that we can implement that still deliver the value of the internet, but in an offline way. And I'd just say part of the solution thinking is to think along those lines. Don't get caught up to, it's got to be broadband. So I think there's a combination of both, some low-speed connectivity for some activities, and then some offline solutions for higher bandwidth capacity type utilisation. Being creative and innovative like that, I think, is something that we need in the region, because we have a set of fairly unique issues to deal with here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Chris, do you have any contributions, or maybe we open up for another question?
Mr. Burkhanov, I think your time is up for this session, please.
Maybe we take 5 minutes to wrap up. I'd like to maybe give Chris an opportunity to say a few words based on...
Okay, before you continue, Chris, can I now ask the honourable ministers and our representative from, because we have a ministerial dialogue session that is happening now, can we invite them to please... the ladies will take you up to the conference room where your ministerial dialogue, please, before we continue with our last questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris?
Thank you. Just by way of closing these remarks, I think that this was a good illustration of how everybody is, all the different communities are in a subtly different state, a different context, and have different priorities. And I think the idea of the dialogues is to make sure we understand those together